Good evening and welcome to tonight's regional news. We start with a story from Guatemala. At least 7 inmates have been killed, most of them beheaded, in clashes between rival gangs at a prison in western Guatemala, according to officials. Hundreds of police have been deployed to restore order at the Cantal prison, which houses inmates from both the Mara Salvatrucha gang and their sworn enemies, the Barrio 18, following violence on Wednesday. Authorities suspect one of the gangs attacked the other in retaliation for an incident that took place several days ago. Gang violence and riots are common at the Cantal prison, which has been condemned by human rights groups for its grim conditions. Built to house 500 inmates, it is currently home to over 4 times that number, police said. Gangs are responsible for nearly half of the 3,500 violent deaths a year in Guatemala. Authorities have said one of the highest violent death rates in the world. In Colombia, anti-government protests have stretched into their 4th week in Colombia as student groups, unions, and others took to the streets again on Wednesday to demand social change amid continuing talks between the government and strike leaders. About 8,000 people attended protests in the capital Bogota, the mayor's office said. The protests began last month after right-wing Colombian President Iván Duque's government introduced a tax reform that critics said would disproportionately harm the working and middle classes, already hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Duque withdrew the proposal, but the demonstrations have continued as protesters expanded their list of demands. The protests have been marked by violence, but the exact death toll remains unclear. The Attorney General's office has confirmed 15 deaths connected to the protests, while one human rights group says the tally is at more than 40. The director of the Pan-American Health Organization, PAHO, Dr. Carissa F. Etain, Wednesday called for closing the glaring gaps in access to coronavirus COVID-19 vaccines in Latin America and the Caribbean. The Dominican-born PAHO director said that only 3% of people in Latin America and the Caribbean have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. She said that the shortage of vaccines is a quote, symptom of our region's over-dependence on imports for essential medical supplies, end of quote. And internationally, Israeli and Hamas have accepted a ceasefire plan that came into effect in the early hours of Friday after 11 days of relentless Israeli bombing of the besieged enclave. Thousands of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip poured onto the streets to celebrate the ceasefire, waving flags and flashing the V sign for victory. Israel's bombardment of Gaza killed at least 243 Palestinians, including 66 children, and brought widespread devastation to the already impoverished territory. On the Israeli side, 12 people, including 2 children, were killed. The World Health Organization (WHO) tallied significant trauma needs in Gaza. A total of 8,538 people had been injured and 30 health facilities had been damaged, it said. President Joe Biden said his administration held a quote, intense, high-level discussions hour by hour, end of quote, with the Israelis, the Palestinian Authority, Egypt, and others towards the agreement. In remarks at the White House, Biden said he sees a genuine opportunity to make progress. Biden emphasized his continued support for Israel's right to defend itself and said the U.S. would replenish Israel's missile defense system. Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz said in a statement Thursday that he had spoken with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and thanked him for U.S. quote, support for Israel's actions to protect its civilians and expressed his hope that the ceasefire will be honored, end of quote. That was all for tonight's regional news. Thank you for joining.